Welcome to this section looking at Jira's administrative backend. As you might expect, you'll need global Jira administrator permissions for everything in this section, and we'll start in this video with understanding how users in Jira work. Inside of Jira, you can have as many users as you want. What you pay for are users who have access to Atlassian products. Jira is an Atlassian product. We've seen a lot of other Atlassian products throughout this course too. Bitbucket, Confluence, the Compass components, and a ton of other apps that are outside the scope of what we're learning about today in Jira. But it's an important distinction to understand between users and users with product access. Because let's say you have someone on your team who leaves. Well, you can revoke their user access, but still keep the user account around. So all the issues, comments, and so on that they created, all that history stays inside of Jira. Speaking of, let's head into Jira, because where we control the users is actually not inside of Jira. To get there, we can come up to the settings gear, and down at the bottom, we'll come into user management under Atlassian admin. And this takes us to Atlassian administration. It's outside of Jira, Confluence, or any other Atlassian product you might have. Think of this a lot like Atlassian Home that we've seen here and there throughout the course. So here you can see what I mean by active users compared to total users. And if we look at one of these users, say if we open up Sophia, we can see she has access to Jira. That is the only product that she has access to. But if we come back to another user, say this is my research account here, so we can see this account has access to both Jira and Confluence. So the active users for these products are the ones affecting our billing. And that leads right into adding new users with product access, because that will affect our bill. So up here at the top right, we can see that we have 8 requests to approve. Now, earlier in this course, when we were logged in as Valerie, we saw what it was like for her to invite someone else to our Jira account. So this is the other side of that, where we can come in and see anyone who has requested access. That includes users who invite others, like Valerie inviting somebody else, or as we can see, I have to blur out the contact info on here because there are other students taking this course who have requested access. But as we just learned, that will directly affect my bill, and that's not something included with this course. Sorry. As a Jira administrator, though, you'll also get an email notification if a user requests someone else get added. But this is where you're going to go to manage it all. So it's a good idea to keep tabs on this area here. So let's hop back to our users and let's walk through the process of inviting a new user from both sides. So as a Jira administrator, you can see the whole process. So I'm going to come up here and invite users. And now we want to enter in their email address. So let's type in her email. This is Nella Taskwell that we'll add in. There we go. And then we choose what products we want them to have access to. So let's just give her access to Jira as a user. We can personalize this email invitation if we want. It will have a default inside of Jira. If we don't, go ahead and click on Invite User. And then we can log in. Let's log in as Nella in Nella's email here, and we can see that email come through. There we go. So if we open this up, we can accept the invitation, and then that's going to go through the process of Nella setting up her account, and then she will have access to Jira. So let's say this is her name, create password, go ahead and click on continue, and there we go. So now she is inside of Jira and ready to start working with our team. Now, before we wrap up this video, I do want to point out the ability to group users together, but also that Jira is automatically using groups to control how users get access to different products. So if we come over to groups here, we can see there are some of these that are by default. So for example, Jira software users. If we come in here and look at the details of this, we can see all the different users that have either active access or have had access in the past inside of this group. So if we were to give them product access, this would be the permissions that they have. So in this case, the Jira software users is a default that Jira adds to give them access to browsing around inside of Jira. So groups are a really handy way of being able to set up some of those permissions that's a little bit separate from the access. So if we remove the product access and then want to give that back, they will retain those permissions as long as they're in those groups. For example, we can see here that anyone in the administrators group will have administrative permissions for the Atlassian products I have on my license. So obviously, how your users and groups need to be set up are going to be unique to your organization. But now that you're familiar with how Atlassian handles user accounts with product access and groups, now you can start to think through what will work best for your organization. Now, in our next video, we'll get an overview of the administration area for company managed projects. In this video, we'll look at some of the customization available to us in a company managed project. So let's hop into the company managed project that we created earlier in this course. And over on the left-hand side, we'll find the project settings. And some of these are pretty straightforward, where we come in to change the name of the project or the project key. But there's a relatively new update that Jira has about project keys that's really cool I want to point out. If you recall, the project key is what Jira uses for the URLs of each issue. So right now it would be growth 1, growth 2, and so on. But if we change our product key, Jira will redirect any of the old URLs to the new one. That's super helpful, and that used to be just how it is. But now, if we come in here and change this, you can see it's going to cause a reindex because it's going to change all of those URLs. Let's save this. And now we can see, oh, look, these are the previous project keys for this project. So it will still redirect that URL, but it used to be that you didn't have control over any of the previous keys. So now we could come in and actually delete that if we want to. Now, fair warning, that will break any of those previous links, right? Because it's not going to be forwarding them. But it's really cool that we have this option to be able to do that here inside of Jira now. And then moving along, we have the categories. Now, quite honestly, it's pretty rare that I see Jira administrators use this, but you can create custom categories just to help organize your different company managed projects across your Jira installation. And then the default assignee down here is when issues are created in the project, who they are assigned to by default. So we can choose either unassigned and leave it unassigned. We've seen that throughout this course as we've created issues and not assign them to anybody, they'll be unassigned. If we want to change that in this project, we can say, oh, make it the project lead, and then who is that lead? So any new issues that get created, if they're not actually assigned to somebody at the point of creation, they will then be assigned to the project lead. It's a nice way of being able to make sure no issues fall through the cracks if you have like a point of contact or something like that, make sure to delegate those issues as they're created. Moving along over here in the project settings, the summary is pretty straightforward. It's just letting us know what the different permissions, workflows, the issue types, the priorities, all of those different things in our project. It's just a summary of all of the other things that we've really learned about and will continue to learn about in this course. And then we have the people. We've already looked at this. We've been familiar with this by now. This is basically adding the same thing we looked at in team managed projects, adding people and controlling their roles in this project. So if we wanted to add in a new project administrator, we could do that here. And right about now, it's time to answer one of the biggest questions I get when onboarding new hires into Jira for companies. What's the difference between roles and permissions? In a nutshell, the difference between roles and permissions can be thought of as if the roles are from the user's perspective, and on the other hand, permissions are from the perspective of the features inside of Jira. So as we can see here with the people, we can see we're changing the roles for those people. But over here with permissions, it's looking at it from the features inside of Jira. So who can administer the projects, who can browse the projects, and then we can choose either the users, the groups, or the project roles that will be able to do that. Moving along with our project settings, there are notification settings, or who gets notified when something happens in the project. For example, if an issue is created, anyone who is watching that issue, the current assignee, as well as the reporter, by default, will get a notification. It'll pop up here. They'll also get an email notification, but we can come in here and change this if we want to. And then we have things like our automation. We'll look at automation in another video later, but this is where that is set up in the project settings. And there's a lot of cool stuff we can do with automation. So again, we'll look at this a little closer later on. And then we have features. So we looked at this in the team manage section, but here in the company manage projects, we can toggle on and off features as well. Like if we don't want to be able to see the calendar view, we can turn that off in this project as well. Then we have our tool chain. So we're focused on Jira today, but one of the great things about Jira is that it can be integrated into so many other tools that you're already using at work. So definitely check out this area to see how you can hook in some pre-existing tools into Jira. For example, if you're using Figma for designs, you can start to integrate that and associate that with particular issues inside of Jira to then hop into Figma to look at those. Then we have our project's workflow, which is something we haven't really talked about yet, but we will unravel the concept of workflows here soon to look at that. And this is the current workflow being used in this project. Moving along in the options here, we have issue-related settings, and a lot of these are things that we looked at with team-managed projects that say control the issue types that are in this project, but they're set up a little bit differently in company-managed projects because they're global entities instead of project scope entities like the team-managed projects. And this is another area that we'll look at a little closer when we create a custom issue type and set it up later on in this section. Now, we've looked at a lot of these things like the layout and screens are going to be changing the fields that are displayed on the issues and how they're displayed. And that's something else that we'll look at a little bit closer because the process to do that in a company managed project is a little bit different than in a team managed project. And then we have things like our components, something we've already looked at too. And then the rest of these are kind of beyond the scope of this course because they're leading to third-party apps or tools outside of Jira itself. So to recap, in this video, we've just scratched the surface at the types of customization you can do with your projects here in Jira to get things set up how your team needs. And a lot of these are things that we've already looked at, but some of them are configured a little bit differently in company managed projects. So in our next video, we're going to start looking at some of these and we'll begin with workflows. In this video, we'll learn about workflows in Jira. Now, we've already learned about how the Agile board columns are mapped to the statuses of issues. We can see that when we configure the board under columns, we can see the columns are mapped to different statuses. With workflows, we can control what those statuses are, but also the transition between statuses. When an issue goes from, say, to do to in progress, does anything happen in that transition? Now, in my experience, a real world use case that we used for this was when issues were sent to the graphics team. We had a column for the graphics team. We wanted a point of contact to automatically get the issue assigned to them so they could delegate it from there. And let's walk through the process for how I set that up for the team using transitions. So let's hop into our project settings over here and then come over to workflows. We can see the workflow being used by this project. We edit the workflow. We can see all of the different statuses inside of this project. So let's come in here and add a new status because we're going to use this for our graphics team. So what's cool is if we actually open this up, this is an example of company managed projects versus team managed projects. We can see all the different statuses inside of Jira across all of our company managed projects, right? So we can reuse any of these instead of creating new ones each time like we saw in team managed project with project scope entities. So let's say this will be for our graphics here. So we're creating a new status. We can allow all statuses to transition to this one, which will basically do the same thing here. Go ahead and add that in. And the category for this, these are default categories. So to do, in progress, and done. This goes back to what we talked about when we were looking at the basics of Agile board and the basic columns. The most basic of them is going to be to do, in progress, and done. There we go. So this is an in progress status. Go ahead and click on create. And now this status is going to be used inside of our project. So here's where we can really start to customize this and make this really cool. So in here, let's select the transition itself. And then look at the post function. So after this transition happens, Jira is going to run these post functions. And we can look at what these are. We can see these are the default ones, but we can come in here and add a new custom post function to assign this to somebody else. So we can either assign it to the current user, whoever is logged in, whoever transitions that, to the lead developer, assigned to the project, the team lead there, or to the reporter, whoever the issue reporter is. So that's going to be custom depending on what issue that is. Or we can just update an issue field, add this in, and that field that we want to change would be the assignee. And let's assign this to, let's say we want to assign this to Valerie. There we go. Add this in. And once this is added, now a post function, the issue will be set to Valerie when it transitions into graphics. Okay. Now, this is a draft workflow. So the way that Jira works with workflows is as soon as you start to edit it, it basically creates a copy as a draft that you have to publish to actually start using it. The reason for that is because if there's users still working on the workflow as you're building this out, it can start to break things. So once you have everything set the way you want, now we can publish this draft. No, I don't need to save a backup copy. Publish this. There we go. So now it's active. So if we come back into our project here, watch what happens. We need to actually add this to the board, the column. You can see we have an unmapped status now. Let's create a new column called graphics. There we go. We can replace the review. Actually, we can get rid of that one. And then we can see that graphic status gets added to it. Jira did that automatically because I called it the same thing as the status. If it's over here, you can just drag it in to map that. And now I'm going to actually move this in front of done so it's not, so in progress graphics, working left to right. There we go. Go back to the board and watch what happens when I take this issue. So right now you can see it is unassigned. If I take this issue and drag it into graphics, watch what happens. We can see it automatically gets assigned to Valerie because of that transition post function that we added. So to recap, in this video, we learned about the concept of workflows, statuses, and transitions. And we even looked at one way we can customize our workflow to make changes to issues automatically when they're transitioning from one status to another. Now, one of the big benefits of company-managed projects is the ability to share some of these configurations, like the custom workflow that we just built, across different projects. And we can do that using what Jira calls schemes. And we'll learn about those in our next video. Earlier in this course, we learned that company-managed projects let you share entities between multiple projects. Well, in this video, we'll learn how Jira does that with schemes. Let's use workflows as an example because we just learned about them in our last video. To apply a workflow to a project in Jira, we do that through a workflow scheme. This can make it easier to work on creating a workflow separately to make sure that it's actually working for our team before it's applied to the project. But the real power in schemes, though, comes with multiple projects. So you can see if I have this workflow set up for multiple projects and then say we make a change to workflow C, that will propagate to all the projects using that workflow. And all of that is done through the scheme. So if we need to change the workflow for multiple projects at once, all we have to do is to link up the scheme to that other workflow. Now, workflows are not the only thing that use schemes. For example, we can control the issue types available in any given project by using the issue type scheme. And there are a lot of other schemes that we have in Jira's issue administration area for different features and entities that we've learned about throughout this course. But now that we have a better idea of the concept of schemes, let's hop into Jira to see how it's done. So there are a few different ways to get to the same place to find our schemes. For example, we can come into our project settings, come into the summary, and we'll see the schemes that this project is using. So we can see the issue type scheme. We can see the workflow scheme here. We can also come in through the issue administration area, which is found up here and all the issues. And then over here on the left-hand side, we'll see the same scheme. So we can see our workflow scheme as well as the workflows themselves. So earlier we edited this actual workflow and we can see it's applied through this scheme. But we have some other workflows in here. For example, here is a custom workflow that I've created. If I come in here and view this, I'm going to open this up in a new tab just so we can see. So here is a custom workflow that I built for the company managed project that I use for my podcast statuses. If we want to reuse this workflow, all we have to do is associate this workflow with our growth project by hooking it up through the scheme. So let's come back over here. So focused on this workflow or the scheme. We can also come into it from the workflow schemes. So we can find it right here. Let's edit this. So we can see the workflow that Jira created for this project. When we created this, Jira kind of creates all this automatically that we can come back in and customize. All unassigned issue types. So anything we haven't customized, we'll be using this workflow in this project. So if we want to add another one, we can add in an existing workflow. And let's say, so this is the workflow we just looked at. We can see a little preview of it here. Let's go ahead and add this in. And let's say we want to use this with the bug issue type in this scheme. There we go. So now we can see the bug issue type in this project will use this workflow, while all the other unassigned issue types, anything else that we haven't assigned to a specific workflow, will use this workflow. So if we publish this scheme, we're going to get this little thing. And you may get this, you may not. I am getting this because if you remember, we created a new status in our workflow called graphics that does not exist in the workflow that we're trying to use now. So we have to map any issues, which right now there's no bug issues that are in the graphics status, right? But if there were, we would have to say, well, these are the statuses available in the new workflow. Which one do we want it to be? So I'm just going to choose in progress. That's good. Go ahead and associate. Jira will go through the process of remapping those statuses if there are any. As we saw in this example, there are 0 bug issues in the actual graphics status. There we go. Acknowledge. And now if we come in here and create an issue, we can see our story has these statuses. Whereas if we come to our bug, we have all these other statuses, right? So only on the bug issue type are these statuses for this completely different workflow that we've created. And there we go. You can start to see how powerful and complex you can start to get with schemes sharing different entities across different projects. For example, changing the workflow on one particular issue type in this project. That same workflow is being used across an entire other project. We don't have to recreate that just for this one. Now that you know more about how schemes work in Jira, it is a great time for you to head over to your own organization's Jira installation to look at how the schemes are set up and what workflows or issue types or other entities that they're connected to, because obviously they're going to be different than mine. When you're ready, I'll see you in the next video where we'll learn how we can create our own custom issue type. See you there. In this video, we'll look at how to create our own custom issue type here in Jira. So let's come into the issue administration area up here in the settings, issues. And if you're not taken directly to the issue types, you can find it over here in the left menu. And here we can find all of the different issue types that we can use across any of our company managed projects. So these are not the issue types in team managed projects. As we learned earlier, team managed projects use project scope entities, which means if we create an issue type in the team managed project, that's the only place it lives. But we can share these across any of our company managed projects, which is why we have to be the global Jira administrator to do so. And I want to point out this little number here because this is the hierarchy level for the issue type. There are 3 types of issue types, and we can create 2 of those types. I know that sounds confusing, but if we come in and add an issue type, we can see the hierarchy level that we can create. So if you think of a standard issue type as the parent and the subtask as the child, If we create a subtask issue type, then we can only create that underneath a standard issue type. In most cases, you're going to be using a standard issue type. So let's create a standard one here. And let's call this maybe new feature. Click on add. And there we go. We have our new feature issue type created. But if we come in and try to create an issue, we won't see the new feature showing up. And that's because of what we learned in our last video. To attach this to our project, we have to go through a scheme. In this case, it's not the workflow scheme that we looked at before. This is an issue type scheme that will attach this to our project. So let's cancel out of this. And if we come over to our issue type schemes, we're looking for the growth project that we have here. So here we can see the scheme. We can see the issue types associated with this scheme. And if we want to change this, we can come in and edit this scheme to change and bring in this new feature issue type. So there we go. We can rearrange this where we want it to show up. Go ahead and click on save. And now if we come in and create a new issue under this project, we can see the new feature issue type showing up. Great. So now that we have our new issue type created and working in the project, before we wrap up this video, let's take this to the next level and associate a completely different scheme to show what will happen. To do that, let's take a different approach through the project instead of coming at it from the Jira issue administration area. So I'm going to come back into the project and come into project settings, because as we learned in our last video, we can come at this from different directions. Let's come into the summary. We can see the same issue type scheme here. To actually change this, to change what issue types are associated with this project, we'll want to come into our issue types here. And then we can see the scheme, and we can change this scheme to be whatever sort of scheme that we want. So let's say instead of using this one, let's use our boats issue type scheme. We can see the issue types in here. Go ahead and click on OK. And now we're going to have this remapping, very similar to what happened when we migrated or we changed the workflow, because the statuses weren't quite the same. Now Jira is saying, okay, originally in this project, you had bugs and tasks, but the new issue type scheme that you want to switch to does not have that. So there are 6 bugs and 7 tasks that if we want to use this new issue type scheme, we're going to have to migrate. So for the task, what do you want this to be? Let's say we want it to be a story instead. So that will convert any of those tasks into stories. And if there were any fields that were on the different issue types, those would show up here. We'd have to remap those as well. And now we're doing the same thing for the bug. So for the bug, let's say instead for that's going to be an episode, right? Come in here and do that. It's going to go through that and make sure that all the fields line up, because remember, the fields live on the issues. And now we get our final little summary. Okay, are we sure we want to do this? Go ahead and click on finish. And then Jira will go through the process of migrating those issue types, which really just means changing each of those issue types to line up with that new scheme that we're changing in the project. There we go. And that's all done. So now if we come in and create a new issue type under this project, we can see we have this whole different set of issue types here in this project that we've changed out. We haven't actually deleted the other ones. So we still have this here. This scheme is just not associated with our project. If we want to get that back, we can just associate this with our new project. Go ahead and associate. And then we're going to walk through the same thing, because we have the same sort of thing in reverse here, where some of those issue types do not exist. So let's say that's, I think that was our task or our bug. Walking through the same sort of process, just going the other way so we can see how this works. And there we go. Those are migrating. All right, so now we've reassociated that scheme so we can see we're back to the original issue types that we had. Great. And now we've completely changed an entire set of issue types being used by this project and then changed them back. So to recap, in this video, we created a new custom issue type, and then we assigned that issue type to a project using the issue type scheme. And we also saw how we can customize entire sets of issue types by applying different issue type schemes to our project very quickly. Now, another common task that you'll be doing as a Jira administrator is customizing this even further by adding custom fields. So with our custom issue type created, let's move on to our next video where we'll look at how we can create a custom field here in Jira. In this video, we'll learn how to create a new custom field. So to do this, let's hop into our Jira settings and then come into the issue administration area. And over on the left-hand side, we will find our custom fields. So in here, we'll find a lot of them that we've already created or some that are built into Jira. So these locked ones, we can't change at all. We also don't really have to use them. But let's come in and create a custom field. And we can see there's quite a few different types of fields available to us, right? And if we come over here to all, we can see there's even more. I'd encourage you to sift through these. There's a lot of them in here that you can use. But for this case, we're going to add this field to our new feature issue type so that we can track where that feature location is. So let's use a dropdown. Now you'll notice alphabetically, dropdown is not here because in Jira, it's actually called a select list. So there's multiple options that we have here. And let's just do a simple single choice. It's basically a dropdown. And then let's give this a name. So this is our feature location. And then the options for the dropdown. So let's say website, mobile app, social, other. We can rearrange these however we want to. We can remove them, add new ones. Once we're happy, click on create. Now we need to tell Jira, what issues do you want to see this field on? So let's find our growth right here. So these are things that were created by default when we created this project. Jira automatically created these screens. So we can come in and say the default issue screen, let's show it there. Update. And now if we come in here and create an issue in this project, all the way at the bottom, we will find our feature location field. But what if we don't want it at the bottom? What if we want to rearrange this? Well, if you recall, we associated it with the screen. So let's come over here to our screens and find that screen. That is the default screen right here. So if we open this up, we can see all of the fields and the order that they're being displayed. So because this is new, Jira just threw it in at the bottom. If we want to move this all the way up, or even remove some of these if we're not going to be using them, right? So we can clear some of these out to only show the issues that we really need. We can even come in here and add tabs. So let's say we want to add a tab and then add in something. Actually, let's come in here and remove this from the field tab. And we can add in our feature location to the features tab, and we can start to add in more if we want. But now if we come in here and create a new issue, you'll notice we have these little tabs here that we can use with our new field. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to point something else out because there's another place that we can go to kind of do the same thing. So let's come back into our project here. And in the project settings, this will look familiar if we're coming like we did with the team managed project. If we come into the issues, we can see we have the screens that we just looked at coming at it from the issue navigation, but we can see that now Jira is starting to migrate things over into the issue layout. So if we come into the layout, and then we can see Bug is using a different layout, but let's edit this issue layout here. We can see this screen that looks very similar to what we saw with the team managed project. Now in here with the layout, you can see we have this tab that we created. So we have this field right here, right? And this will just take us back to configure our screen. We can delete this tab and then bring that back if we just want it all in one. Oops, it's called feature location. There we go. Drag it up wherever we want. There's no save or anything. It just automatically saves. And now if we go back here, let's refresh the page here on the layout, we can see that change get updated where we can see the feature location. We can start to drag this around and move this around. And then in here with the issue layout, we do have to save those changes. So now if we create a new issue, we can see this field has been changed. It's no longer way at the bottom. We've rearranged it here. Now, if it seems like we have two different ways of basically doing the same thing, you're not wrong. But if you're using an older version of Jira, you're only going to see the screens because the issue layout was added into Jira a few years back. But in this video, we learned how to create a new custom field. Then we learned how to add that field to our issues using either the screens or the issue layout. Now, in our next video, we'll shift gears a little bit as we learn about the basics of automation in Jira. In this video, we'll create our first automation in Jira. Automation is a lot like the trigger and action type system of a Zapier or IFTTT, if this then that. And while those are third-party services that can also work with Jira, there are automations built directly into Jira as well. And there are multiple places where we can go to create an automation rule, but probably the easiest is directly from our Agile board using this little lightning bolt, and we can create an automation. But there's another place we can go that I want to point out, because over here on the left side, if we go to our project settings into automation, not only can we create rules here, but we can see there's a ton of templates that are pre-built that we can use right away. As with most things in Jira, typically we'll need to know what we want to do ahead of time. So we're not just creating an automation just for the sake of creating an automation. We want something specific to happen, and then we create an automation to do that for us. So for this example, let's send our fictional development team leader, Valerie, an email anytime a large issue with more than 5 story points is completed. So let's come in here and create a new rule, and we need to tell it what the trigger is. So because we know what we want this to do, it's when an issue is completed, that is a transition between the issue statuses. So issue transitioned is the trigger. We can say what status from if we want a specific one, or just leave it blank to match any status. And 2, the done status. Go ahead and click on next. Now we're going to add a condition because we don't want to send Valerie an email anytime any issue is transitioned to done, but only if that issue has more than 5 story points. So the condition is going to be the fields. Story points are fields on issues. Let's come in and find the story points. There we go. And the condition is greater than 5. Next. Now we need to tell Jira what happens when this rule runs. In this case, we're going to send an email to Valerie. There we go. And then we can just add in whatever sort of subject we want. You can see we can use some smart tags here. So we can say, the issue key. Oops. I was typing in the wrong field there. There we go. Issue key. There we go. And an issue greater than 5 story points was just completed. Click on next. Now let's turn on this rule so we can give a name. Say email Valerie 5+ story points. Turn on this rule and let's give it a test. Let's see how this goes. So let's come back to the project. We need to make sure that some of these issues actually have story points. I'm going to remove the grouping here so it's easier to see. And let's take one of these, and let's say this one, let's give it a value of 3, so it's less than, so we make sure that that condition works. And then we're going to take another one, and we're going to make this a value of 6. So now, when I take this and transition it to done, this one should not send an email, but this one should. So we should only get one email for that one issue. We can come in here and check the audit log just to make sure. Yep, okay, no actions performed because it didn't hit that condition. This one is a success. So let's check Valerie's email and see if that email comes in. Right here, might take a second for the email to come in. Let's refresh. There we go. We just got that email from the automation. And of course, if we need to modify this, we can just hop right back, come into our rules, open this up, and make any sort of changes that we want, like if we want to change what the actual email is that gets sent. And as we saw, there's a ton of different combinations. There's a ton of different templates in here. I'd really encourage you to take some time in between videos to look at the different templates, the triggers, the conditions, the actions available in your Jira installation, and start thinking about how you can take advantage of automations in Jira. Throughout this course, we focused on learning all the core functionality in Jira. And as a result, we spent a lot of time in the administration area of the project settings. In this video, we'll get an overview of some of the other administration areas that we haven't really looked at yet. So let's start from the bottom up, because some of these we have looked at. So down here at the bottom, we have our billing. This is straightforward. I'm not going to open this up for privacy purposes, but this is where you can adjust your billing details for your Jira or Atlassian licenses. Then we have user management, which we have looked at earlier, adding in users into Jira or any of our Atlassian products. And you'll notice these are both outside of Jira. They take us into the Atlassian administration area. Inside of Jira, we haven't really gone in here, but we did look at apps briefly in our overview video because they're also linked from here. This is just another way of getting there. And we're not using any third-party apps in this course, but I would encourage you to come in here and check a lot of these out just to see if there's anything that might benefit your organization to extend the capabilities of your Jira installation. Next, we have the issues. So a lot of these settings should look familiar to you that we've looked at so far, like things like issue types and the workflows and the schemes and the fields. Anything relating to our issues are all in here, and we've spent quite a bit of time in here as well. Next, we have something else that should look familiar. These are the projects. So in here, we can come in and then hop quickly to the project settings. Or something I want to point out in here is that we can manage our project categories if we do want to use those to organize our projects a little bit better. Or we can come in. If a project has been deleted, it goes into the trash, which then will be deleted after a certain amount of time. But we can come in here and restore these projects if we want to, or go ahead and delete them permanently. Next, we have products. So if you recall, when we were looking at users, we were talking about product access. So these are some of the configurations between different products. So for example, in my license, I actually have a license to Confluence as well. So because I'm using Atlassian Cloud, they automatically came in here and hooked up Confluence into Jira. So we can see these application links between them. We can see Confluence is automatically hooked up to Jira. And this is why we're able to see things like the project pages and things like that inside of Jira that take us over to Confluence. Back in these settings here, we have system. We'll look at that here in a moment, but let's hop up into these more personal settings. So we have things like our Jira settings. So when we come up here and click on the logo up here at the top, where do you want it to go? Right now, by default, it's set to the dashboard. We can take it to, let's say, your work, save the changes. Now, when I click up here, it's going to take me to my your work page. We can always come in here and customize that whenever we want. And we can do things like change our theme. If we want a dark theme instead of a light theme, we can change that as well. So one quick note on these personal settings, even though I am logged in as a global Jira administrator, these personal settings anybody has access to. They can change their Jira homepage if they want. But a lot of these settings in here, you have to be a global Jira administrator for, obviously for things like billing and user management and stuff like that. And then last but certainly not least, we have our Atlassian profile. So in here, we can come in and do things like change our profile picture. We can add in any sort of information that we want that other people in our organization can see, or we can change it so that, anybody has access, or nobody. If we don't want anybody else to be able to see that, we can control that right here. And then, of course, up here is where we can come in and change our email if you want to change our email address associated with the Atlassian, or come in and change things like our password and our account preferences and things like that as well. And that pretty much leaves the system settings as the only place that we haven't really talked about in this course. So let's remedy that in our next video as we get an overview of the system settings in Jira. In this video, we'll wrap up this course by getting an overview of the last administration area that we haven't really looked at yet, Jira's system settings. So let's come up to our settings and into system. And as we can see, this could be an entire course in and of itself, but some of these options might look familiar to you, as we've talked about a lot of them throughout this course, but most will be focused on project settings and individual ones, while this is global. For example, we can set up the default dashboard. So we looked at creating dashboards, but in here, we can set up a default for everybody across the entire Jira installation. So let's look at some of the most common things that I've seen Jira administrators customize first. So up here in the general configuration, we can change both the title, which is this right here, as well as what the email is that comes from Jira. And this is helpful by default. It has this little parentheses here. But if you're using email filters on the other side to filter those emails in certain ways, you can customize that in here. So I've often seen users come in and both customize this as well as customizing this, especially if you're using multiple Jira instances. If you have emails coming in from multiple Jira instances, that can be very, very helpful. Update this, and we can see this customized here, and then any emails that come in will have that tagged as well for our filters. And a lot of these, once you set it up, you're probably not going to need to change it that much. I mean, once you change the title of the Jira installation, how often are you going to come in there to change that again? But that leads me into something else that's one of the most popular things that new Jira administrators want to do to customize it, and that is Jira's look and feel to match your organization. So down here, we can change this logo that you might have seen throughout this course. And you might have noticed as I move the browser around, the favicon right here also matches that, and all of that is set up right here. So we can see what the default is. It's just the Jira logo. But we can easily come in here and customize that to match our organization. And every single Jira administrator, every time I've used a client's Jira, they always have the logo customized. But there is more than just customizing Jira that we can do in here. We can do some troubleshooting as well. For example, over here, we can see an audit log, which is basically a history of everything that's happening inside of Jira. So we can see earlier when we were doing things like adding in a tab. So we added in the tab that we were adding our custom field to earlier in an earlier video. We can see that history right here. So this is super helpful. I can't tell you the number of times I've come in here to try to figure something out. If one user says, I can't find where this is, you can do a search for that and be like, oh, Valerie actually changed that. And that's why it's not located there. And then you can start to see what actually is going on to help troubleshoot and support your users. Now, you might notice these little subheaders grouping the different settings together. So underneath the troubleshooting and support, we have security. So things like the project roles. So these are the default project roles that Jira has installed. And we've looked at project roles already as we've added users to projects and we've assigned roles to them. But in here, we can see all of them across Jira globally. And similarly, globally, we have our global permissions, right? So these are things like who can make bulk changes. We've looked at bulk editing issues before. Who has the ability to do that? Right now, everybody can. But if you find in your Jira installation that you're not able to do that, it's probably because your Jira administrator has come in here and changed who can do that. So a lot of these different things, if you're coming across issues as you're using Jira and something works on my end, but you're not able to do that, it's probably because your Jira administrator has come in here and customized those permissions. Speaking of permissions, if you are the Jira administrator and you have somebody coming to you with issues, there is a very helpful thing over here, the permission helper, that will help figure out why a user isn't able to do something. So let's look at Valerie and say she's trying to figure out, we changed the key. So let's say she's trying to figure out this right here and see why she's not able to administer this. Oh, well, the reason for that is because she doesn't have the administer project's permission. Then you can go back and either fix that for her and make her a project administrator so she can make whatever sort of changes that she wants, or at least understand why something isn't working for her if she's expecting it to. Similarly, over here, we also have the admin email audit. So this is before users actually get into Jira. If there is an issue with the email invitation to allow them to get into Jira, well, it will show up in here if there's issues as far as things like the email bouncing for whatever reason, right? So if you send an email invite and on the other side, they say they can't find it, well, you can come in here to see why it didn't actually get delivered, what's going on there. And if it did get delivered, they probably need to check their spam folder. Now, the last thing I want to point out is back here in the general configuration, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we can turn off product recommendations. So throughout this course, you've seen a lot of different Atlassian product recommendations pop up in the interface. And if you don't want to see that, you can turn off those product recommendations right there. So between these system setting customizations and then the tools to help you troubleshoot some issues that your users might have, you can start to couple all of that together with the knowledge that you gained over the past few hours about how Jira works. And now you're ready to go off on your own and start putting everything you've learned into practical use. And with that, we've come to an end of this course. We've learned about team-managed projects, company-managed projects. We've looked at customizing both types of projects, creating issue types, workflows, statuses, agile boards, fields, and so much more. There is so much customization that you can do in Jira. And now that you know about some of its core features and the ways to customize it, it's your turn to start figuring out how you can use Jira in your organization to get more stuff done. And remember, you don't have to get it all done at once. Agile methodology is about continuous improvement, and that works for Jira itself. Try configuring it how you think it's best and work with your team to keep customizing it to help speed up everyone's workflows. I hope you've enjoyed learning more about Jira over the past few hours as much as I've enjoyed sharing it with you. Thanks for watching.